Alright guys, BLM here back with a new video, and in this video, we're back with another top 10 video that I said I was gonna update. Or last time I did this, it was 2 years ago, but here I'll be redoing my top 10 players of the new era, where I did it for Survivors 41 through 44, and somehow now we have double the amount of seasons I had at the time I did the last video. We have 8 seasons to be talking about, where I do think you might question, why am I not doing this after Survivor 50, and just make it around 10 seasons, but again, there might be a bigger video planned after Survivor 50 that might be including a ranking of every new era player and more than that, but either way, obviously I'll be ranking my top 10 players in New Era based on how I feel like they are as players in the grand scheme of things, not necessarily how they played just on that specific season, but how they would do on any given season. Now again, I will be talking through honorable mentions. Now it'll be a lot more detail for 45 through 48, as again, those are obviously new people to talk about. For 41 through 44, I technically already talked about honorable mentions in my last top 10 video. So again, the people that I will mention from those seasons are people that were in the top 10 then, but are not in the top 10 now. Where from Survivor 41, I do have 2 people that were in my top 10 last time, not anymore. First up, gonna mention Ricard. And Ricard is someone that, again, kind of on the outskirts of this list. Again, he is probably in the top 15. Again, he's someone that, again, I could debate with that number 10 slot. I think he's someone that, again, is a pretty well-rounded player. Yeah, I do just question his flexibility on any given season, where he definitely was fighting for that last spot, but again, I did not pick him. Also, Deshaun is someone that I believe was literally number 10 on my list last time, and for this time, like, my opinion of Deshaun as a player has probably gone down over time, but I do think he actually probably gets crapped on a bit too much. I do think Deshaun's a pretty competent player. Again, he was running his OG tribe, and even in the merge, again, he was in a pretty good position at the beginning of the merge, but the problem is obviously he kind of blew up his own game. But I still feel like it's a spot where Deshaun is a pretty competent player, but just one that, again, did not crack the top 10. Also, someone in my top 10 last time that is not in the top 10 anymore is Marianne, who, to be fair, Marianne's always been like a very high variance player, a player that I just simply don't really know what to do with here, where she's someone that definitely has like a killer instinct, has a lot of skills for the game, but also someone that I could definitely see going out early on most given seasons, where, again, it's a very high variance game. And then again, it's another one that, again, was like bordering on the top 10, but did not make it. Also, I mentioned Cody. Cody was in my top 10 last time, and again, Cody's still a solid enough player. I think the issue with Cody is obviously the lack of killer instinct. Again, I think he's very well rounded in most other aspects of the game. He's at least a active strategic player. He is good at challenges. He's very good socially, but again, I think that lack of a killer instinct is what kind of left him out of this top 10 here, to where, again, another one bordering on the list, but did not make it. And the last person to mention here that was in my top 10 last time, that probably wouldn't even be that close nowadays, but either way, Cassidy Clark. Again, she's in my top 10 last time. I don't think she's really that close anymore. My opinion of her has gone down. I think there's people like a Danny McCrae, a Xander, Lindsay Delosowicz, a Mike Turner, Carolyn. That, again, were part of my honorable mentions last time. I would actually probably have higher than Cassidy nowadays. I just think my general opinion of Cassidy as a player has really gone down over time. But again, she was in my top 10 last time. This time around, again, I just don't really have that much faith in her as a player, especially considering I just don't think she could win that season in really any scenario. So again, she did not make the top 10. But with that, now we're moving on to 45, where, again, now we're getting into the people that I have not been able to talk about in the past. Again, I will mention here. I will mention Drew. Drew is someone that, again, I think obviously was a major reason why the read before really were able to dominate the game. I do feel like he was a major strategic driver in that group. I mean, we see him really pushing for a decent amount of votes during the early merge phase of the game, though obviously he just gets outplayed by the end. And again, he definitely was someone that, again, definitely top 20, maybe top 15, but again, someone that just did not make the top 10. Next, I'm moving on to Julie Alley, who is someone that also very skilled for the game. I mean, considering she came into the game as, again, one of the older players, again, I do think she was able to build a lot of respect in the game, to where, again, I think she likely wins in a lot of scenarios in 45, but obviously I just think her navigation through the game is very flawed. I think she's really expedited a target on her back and had a tough time really navigating through the end game with that, but still someone that, again, like, was willing to steal Austin's idol and was still playing a pretty solid enough game where, again, definitely was in contention. Now moving on to 46, I will mention Tiffany, who is someone that obviously will really see the speed tested on Survivor 50, but again, I think Tiffany is a player here that I don't have the most faith in as a player, and that's really the main reason why she wasn't really super close to making it to the top 10, but I do think there are a lot of skills that she demonstrated for the game, though. Again, the fact that she was able to be in the best position on the original Yanu tribe, again, the fact that she was never in danger that entire time, I think that is impressive, and even when we get to her merge, she's instantly in the majority alliance. Now, again, she ends up turning on that alliance, Q ends up targeting her, eventually gets taken out of idol in her pocket. It's not a great exit from the game, but I do think the first half of her game is actually pretty strong, but ultimately, again, not enough to make the top 10. Also, I did consider Maria. Maria is someone that also very skilled for a game, ran a lot of the game with Charlie. Mind you, I do think she gets outplayed by Charlie by the end, but again, I still think another like very solid player, someone that again at least has that killer instinct. She was willing to flip against Charlie and was organizing votes against him. Just was outplayed by the end, but definitely someone that was in contention. And also, I will mention mention Kenzie, who did win the season. Though, again, I just have very mixed opinions on Kenzie. I mean, I think she's a player, again, seems to be very well liked socially. She is at least like an active strategic player. I do question her strategic decisions at points. Again, I think her wanting to turn against Tiffany so early was really dumb. I do think her navigation through the game at points is just very wonky, especially at like final 7. Seems like she goes home if it wasn't for Venus exposing that she had an idol, but really outside that, I just feel like it's a spot where Kenzie definitely has a lot of skills for the game, and she was definitely in contention here, though, again, barely did not make the top 10. Now for 47, I have a lot of honorable mentions here, people that, again, I think played solid enough games, but again, just not enough to be in the top 10. We got Caroline, who obviously is the victim of Operation Italy, though really outside that, again, very solid game, was in the majority for a lot of it. Obviously gets sniped out of the game by the end, and even then, again, I think she would have had to have a good final tribal performance to end up winning the game, which, to be fair, I think she definitely could do, but still, again, someone that skilled for the game, but just didn't see enough to make the top 10. Now, also, I mentioned Andy. Now, technically, I think Andy's maybe the worst player of the honorable mentions from 45 to 48 here, but at least the player that has a lot of skills for the game. I mean, while obviously he starts off very rocky, I do think he was able to flip his game around, and had it not been for Rachel's idol, probably had an easy path to the final 3. Mind you, obviously, again, can he win the game? Very questionable, but still, I think Andy definitely has a pretty solid strategic mind for the game. Obviously executes Operation Italy, but ultimately, again, not enough to be in the top 10. Also mentioned Genevieve, who is another one, kind of like Tiffany in the sense that, like, again, has a lot of skills for the game that we'll probably see tested on 50, but also don't know how much faith I have in her as a player. Again, I think the Saul move is still really bad. Just exposes her in the game very early, especially in a spot where Saul and Teeny supposedly wanted to take her to the end of the game. Again, it just felt like such an unnecessary move, and I feel like that is really one of the bigger issues with Genevieve as a player for me. Is just, I think she's very trigger happy. For a while, again, there's very impressive aspects of her game. Again, her navigation through the perimeter is very strong. I do think, again, by the end, I just don't really have the faith in her to make the correct moves when necessary. But also, we'll mention Sam, and Sam was, again, no one very close to making the top 10. Again, I think he's right on the edge of this list. Someone that, again, his game is very rocky, but I think he is someone that, again, like, was able to really control his initial tribe, was able to get Sierra to do something completely against their best interests in the post-merge. Despite him being such a massive target, he was able to skate his way through the game. And obviously, I do think he got some lucky breaks along the way, but still, I think Sam is a very competent player, but again, did not make the top 10. And then we'll move on to 48, where we got a few honorable mentions here as well. First of all, I'll mention Xiaoheen, who is someone that, again, really ran the game alongside Joe and Eva, and obviously gets outplayed at the final 6, but really, he was in a spot where, had he maintained Joe and Eva's loyalty, he probably just wins the game handily, to where, again, I think he just had like one critical mistake there, but really outside that, again, I don't think he had like as many like impressive maneuvers in the game as people in the top 10, so again, he did not make it on. Also, I consider Camilla. Now, Camilla's someone that my first instinct was that she would make the list, though she ultimately didn't. And again, I think a lot of it's through re-examination of her game. The fact that I just think a lot of her game is really banked around Kyle and what Kyle wants to do. And while she, again, helps enact what Kyle wants to do, I feel like she very little has actual agency of her own, of having the actual influence to do things on her own. I feel like that is definitely an issue with Camilla, to where, again, maybe this will change after Survivor 50, though as of right now, again, I left her off the top 10. Also consider Joe, and again, I think Joe played a very impressive game. I think he really runs the show from beginning to end. Obviously, a big issue is the fact that he didn't seem to have any winner prospects, and again, it seemed like a lot of that was unintentional. And again, I think with Joe, it's like a spot here where if this was the top 10 games played in New Era, I think there's a serious shot he's in the top 10, though again, when we're looking at him as a player, I think as of right now, again, before Survivor 50, I just feel like he's someone that, again, I just don't know how many times he can genuinely win the game unless he changes up his game. So again, because of that for me, he did not make the top 10. And also, I will mention Eva, who, again, I think is similar to Joe. I actually think Eva is probably a better player than Joe. While, again, I think Joe played the better game on 48 that I would personally vote for. I think Eva is someone that seemed to be a little bit more versatile in the game, someone that seemed to be a little bit more active strategically and more aware of her game, to where, again, I think that's something to definitely credit her for, though ultimately, again, still was not enough to make the top 10, though, again, somewhat close to making it on. So, again, those are all the honorable mentions. Now let's get into the top 10 itself. Where, again, the number 10 slot here was very contested. I feel like there were a lot of people that could have fit into this spot. Again, people like Ricard, Camilla, Sam, Joe, Eva, Cody, Kenzie. Again, I feel like there were a lot of people fighting for this last slot. Though at number 10, I did end up going with someone that was on my previous list. I did go with Omar, who ends up being the top ranked Survivor 42 player here, and actually shockingly, by the end of this, somehow every season of the New Era is still represented on this list, which is kind of insane, but still, Omar's a player here I think is very skilled for the game. I mean, we saw him really run most of 42. Again, he was in a pretty good position on his original tribe, had a duo with Jonathan. Once we got to the merge, he is able to build all these connections around him, really be a central vote for a lot of that season. Again, ends up manipulating Mike into taking out High, is a major influence in the Drea vote. Obviously, eventually gets blindsided at 6. And again, I think in general, obviously goes out a little bit early. I believe he is the lowest placing player in this top 10. I believe this list is literally all people that at least made it to the final four. He is the only exception. But again, I do think Omar's in a spot here where, again, I do have a lot of faith in Omar's overall strategic ability. And even though, again, he has been very messy outside the show, watch him play any game of like Blood on the Clock Tower, Goose Duck, again, he is a mess, but that's not how he plays Survivor. And I think if he were to play Survivor, and based on how we did see him play Survivor, I think he is a very skilled player, a very active strategic force, someone that has good social bonds, and even on that season, had Lindsay just played the idol on him, Omar probably has a good chance to go on to win that season. So ultimately, again, I think Omar is a very strong player. A player that I would personally have more faith in than players that missed out on a list. So again, he's here at number 10. Now number 9, moving on to the only player from Survivor 47. A player that I'm actually kind of surprised she made the top 10, but ultimately at number 9, I do have Rachel Lamont, the winner of Survivor 47. And again, this is a big debate for me because, as again, I've talked about this in the past, I'm not a particularly big fan of Rachel's game. I do think Rachel's game is one that, again, is essentially her winning out towards the end. Very like Mike Holloway-esque game, but probably even with less influence the game before her needing to win out than Mike Holloway. Though, to be fair, probably had more allies than Mike Holloway. But still, again, I think it's a game that, again, I would personally not vote for at the end. That being said, the fact that she was able to play that game and have that as a backup, I do think is a good sign for her as a player. As, again, Rachel's someone that I think is a very stable player. Again, very stable strategic mind, very solid socially. Obviously has the ability to win physical challenges. Again, she's a very well-rounded player to where I think on most given seasons, I think Rachel does well. Now, again, I think she's someone that maybe has a danger spot towards the beginning of the season. But again, if she's able to get to the merge, gets a footing in the game, again, I think she's a very dangerous player from that point. Where again, in a spot where like Operation Italy didn't happen, I think she just like easily runs the show with that group that she had of like Caroline, Sue, and Teeny. And even without that, again, she's still able to get to the end. Where again, she's able to win challenges. She's able to find idols. She's able to still find a way to the end. To where obviously I do think those are more luck-based circumstances, but she still does have those things in her back pocket. To where I do feel like Rachel, while again, I do assess her as, again, one of the lesser winning games in Survivor history. I do feel like she is a very skilled player and someone that, again, if she was not coming in with a massive reputation, I would expect her to do well most given appearances. For a while, her actual game is, again, very rocky with her being blindsided constantly. And, you know, now it's still one that, again, I think she has a lot of skills for the game, which is why she's here at number 9. Now, number 8, moving on to, again, the only player from Survivor 41 on this list, also the winner of the season. We got Erica. And Erica, for me, is, again, like kind of the opposite of Rachel, where I think they are very similar archetype-wise and probably have the same downsides in the sense that I think there are worlds where Erica could be an early boot. But I think Erica is someone that was able to play the game that Rachel probably wanted to play, where while Rachel was, again, on the bottom at points and was able to rebound through, again, advantages or immunity wins, Erica was someone that was able to do it without that. And obviously, again, I think when we're assessing them as players, you could definitely debate the merits of the two. Obviously, again, Rachel would have the idols and immunity wins to fall back on, something that Erica probably doesn't. However, I do think Erica, again, has demonstrated more skill for the social strategy aspects of the game on her season, to where, again, I think Rachel and Erica for me are like very similar players, but I do think Erica was able to succeed in the game that Rachel probably wanted to play. And I do think Erica's end game is, again, particularly strong. I think she's really running the show from the Shan vote on, really is able to usurp Ricard's alliance, have a very solid final 3 of like Heather and Xander, and is really controlling those last few votes, and also seemingly had a lot of win equity as well, where even in the war where she's against Ricard, it seems like it would have at least been a close vote there. Where again, I think Erica and Rachel are like kind of two sides of the same coin, just with, again, Erica essentially succeeding in the game that Rachel was attempting to play. And again, because of that, I do have Erica one step above her at number 8. Now number 7, moving on to a player from one of the few seasons that has 2 people from that season on the top 10 here. Here we're going to be starting off from Survivor 44. I do have Carson. And Carson's a player that I do think also maybe a tad high variance, or especially if we're taking things outside the show. Again, I think some people love Carson, some people don't like Carson, but still, I think Carson is someone that, again, I could see worlds where he's a relatively early boot. Like, I don't know if Carson necessarily fits in like the Survivor 48 cast the greatest, but I do feel like Carson is a very skilled player. Again, we saw him really dominate 44. I think he plays a very impressive game of 44. One of the most impressive games of the new era. In a spot where he really runs the show, and in a spot where, again, he's in the central position for really the entire game. Again, on the original Tika tribe, he's right in the middle. He gets swapped over in a spot where he should have been swap screwed, but instead he's right in the middle of that tribe as well. At the merge, he's once again right in the middle where no one is targeting him. And he's the best positions of the Tika 3, and then ends up really running the show from that point forward and gets to the final 4 with a lot of win equity in a spot where his own alliance would have taken him to the end had Heidi not won immunity. But again, I think Carson's game there is very impressive. impressive. Again, would have been a very dominant win. The problem is I do think he is, again, probably more of a high variance player than what his game demonstrated. I feel like he's the type of player, again, if he gets a good cast for him, he maybe is able to do the same thing he does again, but I also feel like he's someone that, again, in a cast of more like Joe Hunters and David Kinneys of the world, like, I don't know if Carson's able to do what he did. I feel like he's the type of player that probably is only able to do what he did on a new era season, which, to be fair, this is an assessment of new era players. But again, I just feel like personally that Carson feels like less versatile than the remaining players that we're going to be talking about, where while Carson is very skilled for the game and someone that, again, I think it definitely played one of the best games of the new era, the consistency of that for me is a little bit questionable. And again, considering, again, this top 7 is actually like a very strong top 7, all very good players, I feel like ultimately Carson's someone that my perceived lack of consistency from him is what leaves him at number 7 here. Now number 6, we're moving on to the other player from Survivor 44, someone that has actually dropped on this ranking in comparison to the last one, with a certain player leapfrogging him by the end. But at number 6, I do have Jam Jam. And obviously Jam Jam, winner of Survivor 44. And for me, Jam Jam and Carson are like right next to each other at this point, where I think it's a spot where my opinion of Carson has probably stayed the same, but my opinion of Jam Jam has gone down. Where, again, immediately after 44, I did think he was the best new era player. Again, he seems to be very well-rounded. He is, again, adored socially. And again, he seemingly ran the show of Carson. However, I think in the time since, I probably give Carson more of the credit for that. However, I do think Jam Jam still deserves some of the credit. Obviously, like, he was able to build a strong bond with Jamie that kept her from flipping on them, and that's a major reason why Danny ends up going out in the spot that he does. But I do think the thing about Jam Jam, though, for me, is I do think he's a bit of a mess strategically, where I think he needs someone like Carson to really help him in the game, where I do think he was essentially playing to give Carson the win. Again, he was trying to take Carson to the final 3, where the jury has said that they would have voted for Carson. He, again, literally helps him try to make fire at the final 4. He also, while like good socially, still pisses off people at points. Again, he did get into feuds with like Carolyn at points and like Josh, and even then, like, he's more of a mixed bag. That being said, the reason why he's above Carson is because I do think Jam Jam's probably more consistent in the game. Again, I think Carson's someone that, again, I think Carson's either someone that is probably able to run the show, or he's a relatively early boot. And for me, I don't really see it in between for Carson, where I feel like with Jam Jam, I don't see Jam Jam going home early in any scenario. I think he's almost always going to make it deep onto any given season. The problem is, can he win at that point? Is he going to be too likable to where no one's going to take him to the end? Or is he going to be too honor-bound to his number one ally to where he's going to go to the end of them and proceed to lose? Again, I think, for me, those are the major flaws with Jam Jam as a player. Just the fact that, again, I just do struggle with how much Jam Jam has that killer instinct in the game, and I really don't think he does. However, again, I do think Jam Jam is just a very well-rounded player, someone that is going to make it deep on most given seasons. So I still do look at him pretty highly, but just, again, a tad lower than what I did last time. So again, for me, he's there number 6. Now, number 5, moving on to another player from the other season. I have 2 people in the top 10 and again, both of which being in the top 5. But at number 5, I do have Austin from Survivor 45. And Austin's a player here that, again, I just think is a very solid, well-rounded player. I mean, I think Austin plays, again, one of the better runner-up games in Survivor history. Again, really runs the show with the Reba 4 for most of the season. Obviously gets outplayed towards the end. Again, at the final 6 and final 7, D does completely outplay him, and that's really just undeniable. But I do think Austin, up to that point, plays potentially a better game than D. A spot where, again, he still has win equity, a spot where, again, no one is really targeting him, and a spot where he does have a lot of influence in the game, where really him and Drew seem to be the main drivers of who goes home up to that point, and they seem to be the ones really pushing for the Kelly vote off in particular. And again, I think it's a spot where Austin's game up to that point is very impressive. The problem is, like, obviously, again, like, I think he lets go of the gas from the final 7 on. Again, D really outplays him in those final 6, final 7 rounds. Even at the end, he was going to take D to the end despite knowing he would lose to her. That's also very bad. So again, I think he's known that, like, may have that lack of a killer instinct, but again, I think he is a very impressive player. Again, he's a very well-rounded player. He's very good at challenges. He's liked socially, and he has a pretty solid strategic mind if he just has that killer instinct, where, again, the remaining people in the top 4 end up having, to where ultimately, again, I think Austin and Jam Jam are kind of on the same level for me. Obviously, Jam Jam wins and Austin doesn't, where, again, that's a major criticism. But to be fair, if what happened to Jam Jam happened to Austin, and that D, the person that he was going to take to the end, ends up losing in fire at 4, again, Austin probably does go in to win the game. Again, is there really that much of a difference between the two outside of a more luck-based circumstance? And even against D, he still gets 3 votes, which I think is pretty impressive as well. Where, again, I think Austin plays a very solid, well-rounded game. But again, I think that, like, minor lack of a killer instinct is what leaves him out of the top 4 for me. Now, number 4, and now a player that, again, if I were to redo my top players in the new era list, for last time, this would actually be the top person on the list. A player from Survivor 43. Here, I do have Jesse. And again, Jesse is a player here that just plays a very solid, consistent game from beginning until final 6. Again, he's really at the top of the pecking order alongside Jesse, really running the show, really the swing vote at the beginning of the game as well. But again, ends up really dictating a lot of the votes in the post-merge phase. The problem is obviously the fact that like Cody was looked at as the alpha there. Cody is some person that had more respect from the jury and likely does go on to win if they get to the end together, which puts him into the precarious endgame position he was in. But again, I still think there's a lot of credit to be given to Jesse, the fact that he had that killer instinct. He was willing to pull off this big, flashy move to get rid of Cody, to where while obviously you could definitely qualm with how he does it in the sense that it increases the massive target on his back, he still needs to get rid of Cody. And it's going to be a very difficult thing to do past that final 6 rounds, where I don't necessarily fault him too much for making that move there. I more so fault him for how he's positioned at that point to begin with, and that he wasn't able to undercut Cody and gain more jury respect than Cody. But really, again, like making the final 6 move, a very impressive move, and again, shows his killer instinct in the game. And considering he had the idol for 5, he really puts himself where he's really just one challenge win away at final 4 to winning the game. If he wins final immunity, he wins. If he wins fire making, he wins. Now again, was he that likely to win fire making against the group that was there? Probably not. But still, I still think Jesse, again, plays a very impressive game. If he goes on to win, he plays a truly elite game there. But again, we are at the top 4 now, and I think at this point, again, the top 3 here probably just have cleaner games, where again, the fact that Jesse was in this position where he needed to make that move against Cody at the final 6 to the detriment of his own positioning in the game is, again, a flaw here. Where again, the remaining top 3 are all players that were able to still get to the end despite that, and one that literally makes a similar move, cutting his number 1 ally before the end and still was positioned to get to the end. To where again, I think when we're amongst the best of the best, I do feel like Jesse, again, just has that flaw there to where, again, he doesn't make it into the top 3. So again, consider number 4. Now number 3, moving on to the last remaining non-winner on the list, but one that again comes very close to winning, probably the closest anyone's gone to win, didn't win outside Dominic, and that player is Charlie Davis. And again, Charlie here, I think, plays a very impressive game as well. Again, I think really for most of the game, I think you can very much compare him to Jesse. Again, he is really running the show alongside his number 1 alliance in Maria. Again, positioned in the middle at the very beginning of the game, again, is able to demonstrate more influence in that portion of the game that I feel like Jesse is, where that's a spot where we see Jesse like pull away the votes from Ben, and a spot where Ben is like his like secret number 1 ally, is able to get Maria to go against the women. Then we get to the merge, where again, he's just really in the middle for most of that time. And I feel like an understated aspect of Charlie's game, the reason why he is above Jesse here is because, again, I think most of their games are pretty similar. However, Charlie was a Jesse that positioned himself better in the game. Again, Jesse is in a position where once he makes that Cody move, he is a dead man walking if he doesn't win that Final 4 challenge. Charlie is in a position instead where, again, he makes that move against Maria and is still well positioned in the game. Where again, he is someone that had Ben next to him as his backup. And I feel like that's something that, again, Jesse really lacks. He doesn't have this other ally that is also willing to take him to the end. Now, again, you could technically debate Gabler, but even then, I don't feel like that was really intentional from Jesse's point of view, where I feel like it was very intentional from Charlie's point of view. He actively keeps Ben in the game as this secret number 1 ally for him, again, going back all the way to the pre-merge. So again, he takes the shot at Maria and is still well positioned at the Final 4. Again, has Ben still taking him to the end. Even if Ben did not win Final Immunity, he likely still makes it to the end. And also had a lot of win equity. Mind you, obviously not as much as Jesse, where Jesse just handily wins against everybody. But still, like, Charlie comes 1 vote away from beating Kenzie. Again, had he just gotten 1 more vote, Ben votes for him in the tiebreaker. Again, had he gotten to the end against Ben and Liz, I think he handily wins that. And I do think Charlie is someone that just has, again, a very smooth game for most of it. Again, he doesn't really have this spot like Jesse where he's needing an idol or needing the final challenge to get to the end. Again, he just is able to navigate through the game a lot smoother while also having the same amount of influence in the game. And again, being similarly positioned in a duo that's really running the show. And again, I do think Charlie, again, essentially plays the better version of Jesse's game, with the one complaint being, again, a little bit less win equity, but still, again, comes extremely close to winning even in the situation he was in. So ultimately, again, I do think Charlie is a step above Jesse here at number 3. Now, number 2, and again, the top 2 here are 2 of the remaining winners on the board. The 2 winners that are on Survivor 50, where again, this will likely change after Survivor 50. We'll see how this goes. But to be honest, this wasn't that big of a debate for me, even though I think there is potential for this person to be number 1 after Survivor 50, especially if they avoid the massive target on their back. But at number 2, I'm going to go with Kyle Frazier. And again, Kyle is in a spot here where I think coming out of 48, I think he played a very impressive game. He is one that, again, played a very intentional game. I do think he really was someone that was, again, essentially playing this like kind of Charlie-esque game of him like kind of riding the middle for a lot of it, had a duo of Camilla, also had a duo of David, had a kind of duo with Joe as well. And to where, again, he was able to get himself into the strong person alliance and really just run a lot of the post-merge game alongside Joe and Eva, but then, again, outplay Joe and Eva by the end and still have more win equity than them. And again, I think all that is very impressive. Now, obviously, again, you could definitely qualm with him needing an idol in the 4th round after the swap, but again, it was a spot where he was swap screwed. And even then, I think it at least like shows some versatility there, especially in how he was able to pull the votes onto him with like Operation Guyana and everything. I don't think that's necessarily a negative, especially on him as a player, especially when we add in the notion of, again, he can find idols. That's also a thing he can do. But again, I think Kyle as a player here, again, very well-rounded, again, good at challenges, again, can win challenges when he needs to, can find advantages, was able to situate himself very well in the game, and was, again, able to outplay Joe and Eva by the end. Again, taking out Xiaoheen ends up being a very impressive move from him, even though I definitely questioned it at the time. And again, he was able to have an accurate read on the jury, and again, likely has a lot of win equity if he gets to the end, where, again, Kyle is just a very solid, well-rounded player with, again, not many flaws to really point out here. I actually feel like Kyle probably has less flaws to point out than the number one person we'll be talking about. However, I do think the number one person we'll be talking about probably had a stronger winning game, one where they were more out in front, and probably someone I would probably have more faith in most given seasons, where I feel like they're a type of player that is like has that charisma to build this group around them. I don't know if Kyle necessarily has that. I feel like he's very rarely going to be at like the top of the pecking order, but still someone that, again, is able to stealthily navigate through the game if he doesn't have a massive target on his back. To where, again, I do actually feel pretty good about Kyle as a player, and I do think it is relatively close between these top two, but I do think the number one player here has a more impressive game by the end, to where, again, while it is close, and I could definitely see this changing after 50, as of right now, I do have Kyle here number 2. Now, number 1, the best player of the new era, again, a winner of the show, from a player we're about to see play again. At number 1, I do have D. Valderez. And again, D, I just think plays a very impressive game on Survivor 45, one that demonstrates a lot of skills, probably one of the most well-rounded players in Survivor history, again, is able to win a lot of challenges, is pretty well-liked socially on her season, and is also a very cutthroat player. Now, not entirely, and I think this is probably actually one of the things that I think you could argue between D and Kyle, is that I feel like Kyle is a player that, if necessary, is willing to cut his number 1 ally. Again, he literally cuts Camilla at the final 4. However, I feel like with D is someone that isn't willing to do that. I don't think she's willing to cut Austin or Julie from the game, even to her detriment. Again, I think that's actually her biggest negative in her entire game, is the fact that she opens herself out to be sniped out of Final 5 because she's not willing to do that. And again, I think that is the major glaring hole in D's game, but really outside that, I still think D is a very strong player. I do think D is, again, in the central position the Reba 4, while, again, I do think Drew and Austin probably have more influence in the moves actually being made during the early merge phase. I do think, again, she is still able to avoid being targeted despite being a massive target on the board, and then at the final 7, final 6 is really able to run the show there. Is really able to trick the likes of Austin and Drew during the Emily boat there, and then proceeds to then blindside Drew at the final 6. And again, all that is very, very impressive. Now, and again, it actually leaves her in, again, a better position to where she doesn't need to flip against Austin. Where, again, I think you could debate, again, who wins between Kyle and Camilla if they get to the end. Again, the jury, at least at the time, seemed to be pro Camilla, but that was also just a small part of the jury we saw say that. But still, it's a spot where with D, I do feel like she plays the more optimal strat of it not mattering if you cut your number 1 ally or not, because you did enough to beat them to begin with. And again, while I do think I would prefer if she was willing to cut Austin and Julie, which I don't think she was, I do think she at least does the appropriate work to end up beating them at the end. And I think that is something to definitely give D a lot of credit for. So while, again, I think the likes of, again, Kyle, Charlie, Jesse all had more of that killer instinct, this like ability to actually cut their number 1 ally. So while D lacks that, I feel like she has the ability to usurp her number 1 ally. And I think that's something to equally give her a lot of credit for. So again, I just think her game is, again, just very strong from beginning to end. Now, I will definitely qualm with that final 5 round. And I think that does show probably the most glaring hole of her game. But really outside of that, she is a very competent player, very well-rounded player, and a player I would just have a lot of faith in on any given season, where despite her coming into Survivor 50 with a massive target on her back probably, I still actually feel pretty decent about how she could potentially do, to where, again, ultimately between her and Kyle, again, it is very, very close. But again, I think D's winning game is better, and I think D, again, is probably better at like actually getting people to follow her in the game, which again gives her a slight edge here to be at number 1. But there we go. I mean, that is my top 10 players of the new era. Obviously, again, this might change after Survivor 50, but again, if there's an update to this list, you might see it in another form in a future video, like over a year from now, probably. We'll see. Well, beyond that, obviously, again, got Survivor 49, Survivor 50 coming up. I'll obviously do coverage of that. Still have some Survivor 50 related videos I'll probably do at some point down the road. And really outside that, obviously, just more of the typical style of content for the channel. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.